with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, October 10th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a hybrid Michael and Sam Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Sarah A. Seo, Policing the Open Road, How Cars Transformed American Freedom. Turkey's president threatens that he will send 3.6 million Syrian refugees currently located in Turkey to Europe if European countries label his country's military bombardment an occupation. Turkey's military operations are much larger than expected, analysts say. Operation Peace Spring has already claimed multiple civilian lives, including 16 civilians. 33 members of the Syrian Democratic Forces were wounded. Trump, meanwhile, has amplified his despicable sellout of the Kurds by downplaying their historical role and, shockingly, getting a basic piece of history wrong. Amid reports of civilian deaths, Bernie Sanders condemns Trump giving the Turkish army permission to slaughter Kurds in Turkey. Apple removes an app that tracked the Hong Kong police, helping protesters. Or I should say, the app helped protesters. Apple is now helping authorities. Trump urged a top aide to help Giuliani client facing DOJ charges. Ousted Ukraine envoy expected to testify in an impeachment probe despite White House vow not to cooperate, congressional aides say. Representative Mark Pocan calls for blocking Pompeo's salary until Ambassador Sondland testifies on Ukraine. Finally, some hardball. And Donald Trump, always on the international front, defends a diplomat's wife involved in a car crash that killed a British teenager. It happens. Activists entice ICE agents to quit by finding them new jobs. Brilliant piece of activism there. The Espionage Act is again deployed against a government official leaking to the media as the war going back to the Bush and Obama administrations against whistleblowers continues in earnest. Top labor leaders say that USMCA will be defeated if a quick vote is held. And Sanders says he misspoke about scaling back rallies after a heart attack, vows a vigorous 2020 campaign. His campaign is still profoundly real, folks. If you're on the left, time to stop effing around and take it seriously. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. We've got some ads that Sam lovingly and fully crafted to get to in a minute or two. We'll talk more about Rojava. Here's the reality. The reality is that the permission given and the removal of U.S. presence is facilitating a mass slaughter conducted by a vicious Turkish regime. Rojava is not perfect. It is not a utopia. But it is a dynamic left-wing experiment, and it is a group of people that have fought enormously effectively against ISIS. we should oppose all imperialisms. Absolutely, the most powerful imperialism in the world today is the U.S. global order. This is a micro example where the greater harm is obviously the precipitous withdrawal. And we see it happening right now, which is sort of stunning that people can still build justifications or fantasies about this. Now, obviously, Lindsey Graham and other people are shedding crocodile tears. They were never serious about safeguarding the Kurds. And it may well be that the only option left for the Kurds, and something that should have been supported years ago, is some type of strategic alliance with Assad. I mean, this is geopolitics. The Kurds had to rely on a hegemon to secure their safety. Maybe now they have to partner with a government and a leader who's engaged in multiple crimes against humanity. But right now, the Turks are engaging in crimes against humanity and destroying an experiment which we should and must have solidarity with, again, with no equivocating nonsense and simplistic one-dimensional thinking. And, yes, there's plenty of strange bedfellows. Sure, it's weird to have the same position as a Lindsey Graham for entirely different reasons. But I think it's weird that other people have apparently the same position as Tayyip Erdogan and Donald Trump for their own different reasons. This is Donald Trump today expressing his profound contempt for the Kurdish people. And again, this is historical. The Kurds are multi-sector victims. They are the victim of internal hegemonic projects which have thwarted their autonomous will, most glaringly in Turkey, but I mean also obviously in Iraq, where they were victims of genocidal actions by the Saddam government. All across that region. And now they have generated an autonomous space of leftist innovation, which is certainly not perfect, certainly has mistakes and blah, 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 blah. But I have never made a perfection the metric of anything, let alone global politics. And they're going to get routed and gutted unless something significantly changes. And this is the contempt that this disgusting, grotesque leader in the White House has for them, and everybody who's supporting this action is showing.
The Kurds are fighting for their land, just so you understand. They're fighting for their land. And as somebody wrote in a very, very powerful article today, they didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land. And that's a different thing. In addition to that, we have spent tremendous amounts of money on helping the Kurds in terms of ammunition, in terms of weapons, in terms of money, in terms of pay. With all of that.
Okay, so first we actually do have a minor fact check, which is not the main point, but I do want to do the minor fact check. Okay, setting aside the Kurds traveling across Eurasian landmass to volunteer for Normandy, I think we can ignore that one. Maybe Trump is confusing it with British colonial subjects, like enforced soldiers from India who fought on behalf of the British Empire. Maybe that's what he has in mind in his fizzle brain. But there actually was support for the Kurds towards a broader global effort against Hitler's Germany. What was that, Brendan?
They were part of the Iraq levies. They were a quarter of the fighting force, and which eventually was rolled into part of the British Royal Marine Commando. Mm-hmm. And they fought in Albania, Italy, and Greece.
Wow.
So not Normandy, checkmate.
So this bloated idiot, this bloated, disgusting moron gets it wrong, even by the same stupid, disingenuous metrics he's using. I think it's very interesting to watch actual, the way Trump gets played by people with actual savvy, like Erdogan. This and again, we'll keep spelling this out. This isn't a preventative war. This is about to happen, and we should deploy U.S. air power or troops. Those situations have led to catastrophic U.S. actions across the globe, so-called humanitarian intervention. But just in the same way that we need to pivot radically from a moralistic, one-dimensional airbrushing of U.S. hegemonic actions across the globe, we can still look at and deal with the world as it is and appreciate the historical irony that a U.S. troop presence was protecting, first of all, a historically repressed and genocided group by multiple Middle Eastern governments, Turkish and Arab. Then also recognize that, in fact, and that, by the way, should be sufficient. That should be sufficient. The same dynamic could apply to the Kurds of northern Iraq, who have much more, I would say, Emirati politics in some respects. But it also then happens to extend to the fact that they have a dynamic and important political innovation and experiment, which is the only recognizable left in that region. Not nationalist, but left. And I'm on the left, so that's who I have solidarity with. I condemn this action. I think it's disgusting. I think it's horrifying. I think it is analogous, not the same, but it exists on a spectrum of the Israeli occupation and slaughters in Gaza, with the Modi regime's attacks in Kashmir, with what's happening in West Papua, and this broader sort of formalization of this type of brutality. Who wrote that piece, that brilliant piece that Donald Trump referenced?
A man by the name of Kurt Schlichter. Will Summer pointed this out. Schlichter wrote a column here. I'm not sure what the headline is, but this part is the relevant portion. It's also true that the Kurds would have fought ISIS anyway, since their psycho-caliphate was right next door. Let's be honest. The Kurds didn't show up for us at Normandy or Inchon or Kaysan or Kandahar. The Syrian Kurds allied with us in their homeland because we have a shared common interest in wiping out the head-lopping freak show that was ISIS. Moreover, not all Kurds are not equal. The PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, are a bunch of commie terrorists who have been fighting the Turks for a long time.
Well,
those Reds are no friends of ours.
Well, someone's getting their Turkish talking points. I mean, look, there's actually real the SDF is definitely connected to the PKK. There's no doubt about it. And has the PKK, not the SDF, but as separate operations, engaged in terrorist attacks historically in Turkey? Yes, absolutely. At the same time, do they represent a genuine aspiration for rights and autonomy? 100%. And if I can understand and think with some complexity about a group like the IRA, I certainly can about the PKK. Now, in addition to that, under the broader leadership, embracing the work of Murray Bookchin. So first of all, their demands and their suffering and their oppression, they're 100% right about. And anybody who would deny that is being chauvinist or insincere, delusional, or uninformed. And now, in the current political context, they have been a force of a dynamic, progressive experimentation. This is also another thing, though, that Kurt Schlichter apparently has on his record. Do we have this up? I don't even know who Kurt Schlichter is. I mean, obviously he's just some other grotesque idiot, but this is a photo. It's from CBS News. A Yemeni mother fought for 17 months to overcome the U.S. travel ban and visit her sick 2-year-old son. He died only days after she arrived. And Kurt Schlichter, in the epitome of Trumpism, quote tweeted this story with, "I don't care." But, I guess my question's really, though, to a lot of people, is that, frankly, your same reaction to the slaughter that's taking place now by Turkey? All right. There's no elegant transition, so we'll just get to it. We'll change the mood up a little bit. Sam's got some paid consumer reports.
Folks, you know that for the better part of this program. We've been doing it for almost this iteration for 10 years. My daughter would not do anything with me. She was not excited to see me. She would not talk to me. My son is like this now. My kids they want nothing to do with me. That has changed in the most unlikely way. Maybe it's unlikely. Hunt a Killer is the murder mystery subscription box that immerses you in an ongoing detective experience. Mila is so psyched about this, it's unbelievable. So with every delivery, you sift through a case file, right, full of evidence. You eliminate suspects till, of course, you crack the case, you catch the killer. Hunt a Killer gets you talking, having fun together. Mila and I anticipate when the box is coming. We're doing now multiple. They basically have, think about it as like a TV show, like a 6-episode TV show, seasons. And we're already talking about, I don't know. We may do this until she gets to college. If you're a detective that prefers to work solo, Hunt a Killer is built so that you can choose how you want to play. With 2,000 5-star reviews on Trustpilot, it's no wonder Fast Company named them as one of the most innovative entertainment companies of 2019. Plus, part of the proceeds for every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation to help you fund cold case investigations. Mile and I have a board that is, like a bulletin board that we put up in her room, has all the evidence on there, and she calls me with theories. It's fun, and the thing is, you can play with other people online if you want, but she's actually doing something that she enjoys that does not involve a screen. And that is worth $1 million. But fortunately for you, for our listeners, Hunt a Killer does not cost $1 million. And you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. Hurry to take advantage of this offer. Embrace your inner detective. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. huntakiller.com/majority.
Oh, I like when Sam throws back to me. It's better when he goes, back to Michael. And I go, thank you, Sam. All right, this is an interview that Sam I think this was recorded last week. Really good conversation. Policing the Open Road, How Cars Transformed American Freedom, with Sarah Seo.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program a legal historian of criminal law and procedure, the 20th century United States, teaching at the University of Iowa Law School, author of Open Road, How Cars Transformed American Freedom, Sarah Seo. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
This is a fascinating story, and it starts with let's actually start with how you came to choose this topic, because it's not the implications of the advent of the car on our law is not, something that's necessarily floating around the ether, right? I mean, it's just full of unintended consequences. I don't think they contemplated beforehand, and I don't think it gets much attention after the fact. But how did you come to write about this specific topic?
Actually, I started from the end of my book. I got interested in it because I wanted to look at the history of the war on drugs. The question really started forming when I was clerking in New York City for 2 federal judges, and much of the criminal docket in federal courts in New York were drug cases. And so I was really interested in how the drug war shaped our criminal procedure and criminal laws. And so what I started doing is, and I was really interested in the law enforcement of the war on drugs. And so if you wanted to study law enforcement as a constitutional matter, really there is one provision that is most directly relevant to governing what the police can do, and that's the Fourth Amendment. Because the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. And most police encounters with citizens begin with a seizure, which is a stop. A police stops someone, and immediately the Fourth Amendment kicks in. And in that encounter, a search can happen as well. And so the Fourth Amendment governs that police-citizen encounter. And so what I did, I'm a historian, so I just started reading all Fourth Amendment cases from the very beginning of U.S. history. And what I found when I pulled up all these Fourth Amendment cases in Westlaw was really surprising to me. I can go on.
Yeah,
what surprised me. Yeah.
Well, I guess let's tell us what was surprising about these Fourth Amendment cases, and then I think we can circle back and talk about why there was a need for the development of this law, in the era as cars were being introduced in a mass way. But what were those Fourth Amendment cases that were so interesting?
Well, so there's two things that really stuck out to me. One was that Fourth Amendment cases were really rare until the 1920s. Some years, some decades, there were 1 or 0 Fourth Amendment cases in state or federal courts. They started popping up a bit more in the late 19th century, but there was an explosion of Fourth Amendment cases in the 1920s, which goes to the topic of my book. It coincided with the mass production of cars. And when I was reading these cases from the 1920s on, so many Fourth Amendment cases had to do with car stops and searches. And so from the very beginning, I realized that this really is a story. The story of the Fourth Amendment is a 20th century history, first of all, because they were pretty rare before then. And second of all, it's a story about cars, policing cars.
That's fascinating. And let me and before we get into sort of the what the implications of the introduction of the car in such a widespread way impacted our society and policing. Why, give me a sense of like what the Fourth Amendment cases were before it started to involve a car. I mean, obviously, it's the Fourth Amendment. It obviously was on the minds of folks when they're drawing up the Constitution. What was the original construction, or I guess impetus behind the Fourth Amendment, and why was it so underutilized, I guess, or why was there less of a need for it in, let's say, the 19th century?
Sure. So I think you're asking two questions. One was, what was the original need for the Fourth Amendment? Why did the Founding Fathers include the Fourth Amendment as one of the amendments to the Bill of Rights? I think that's one of your first questions, right? Yeah. And then the second question is about what were some of the cases, the few cases that did arise, what were they about?
Right.
That's kind of the second question. Okay. So starting with the original purpose for why the Founding Fathers included it. So it went back to the experience during that led up to the American Revolution. We've all studied about how American colonists protested taxation without representation, right? England imposed taxes on the American colonists. They didn't want to pay, and so a lot of them didn't pay their taxes. And so what Parliament did was they passed these general laws. They basically passed a law that allowed agents of the king to stop and search anyone, anywhere, any place. They were called general warrants that gave agents, law enforcement agents, to search for tax evasion, basically. And
the tax evasion, just to be clear, I mean, my understanding is the tax evasion was a function of basically goods that we would, that from the king's perspective were smuggled. So if you had certain goods on you that you had not paid tax on, maybe didn't have the stamp or the wax or whatever it was that indicated that you had already that you had paid taxes on these, they were contraband.
Exactly. And so what the Fourth Amendment requires is a specific warrant, right? It doesn't take away law enforcement's ability to search and to seize. What the Fourth Amendment says is if the government wants to search and seize, they need to have a specific warrant specifying who they're going to seize or arrest, what they're going to search, and where they're going to search. So no more general warrants that are enacted by law. Law enforcement have to go to a judge to get out a specific warrant.
The idea being that you need to be aware that there's been a specific, a case of smuggling or / tax evasion, however you want to call it, as opposed to I'm going to search every home and person and just fishing expedition at any and all times.
Exactly. What the founding fathers wanted to prohibit were general exploratory fishing expeditions, right? And so another requirement of the Fourth Amendment specifies is that to get a warrant, to get a specific warrant, the law enforcement needs to make out a probable cause, right? There's a reason why they want to look at certain places or to make an arrest. They have to articulate probable cause in front of a neutral magistrate. So that was the protection to prohibit general warrants from being enacted. So that's the original purpose. Go ahead.
Well, and then I guess, so the absence of needing the Fourth Amendment after, the idea of we don't have an outside force. What does the lack of invocation of the Fourth Amendment during the 19th century tell us about the dynamic of policing?
Sure. So there's two things. One is, so the Fourth Amendment applies only to the federal government. Before the 20th century, the federal government didn't really have a police force, a general police force. They had a really small state with very few law enforcement agents that really focused on discrete federal crimes. And there weren't a lot of federal crimes. Most of the crimes were tax evasion types of crimes, treasury crimes. Before the FBI, which is the main law enforcement agency today, the FBI was founded in, I believe, 1908. Before then, most of the law enforcement agents in the federal government were part of the Treasury Department. And so the opportunities for federal law enforcement agents to need to investigate crimes, and it was just not a common occurrence before the 20th century. So you don't really have the Fourth Amendment coming into play all that often. So that's the federal government story. My book also looks at what's going on in the state courts as well, right? Because there are local police departments or local law enforcement agencies at the local and state level, and all states have their version of the Fourth Amendment in their state constitutions. And so the question is, why don't we see more Fourth Amendment cases at the state level until the 20th century? And there's different reasons for that. Even at the local level, there weren't a really big law enforcement presence. There were sheriffs and constables. Some of the big cities by the mid-19th century did establish police forces, but they weren't as heavily staffed as one might expect. And that's because much of criminal investigation, prosecution, and enforcement was done privately. And what I mean by that is it was often private citizens and private businesses who investigated and prosecuted crime against the people who committed crimes against them. It wasn't a public police department or a public prosecutor. And so the Fourth Amendment really doesn't come into play in those cases either. So the development of modern police forces, which happens in the 20th century, leads to more Fourth Amendment issues. Before then, it didn't really come up.
Well, and that leads us to this sort of story of the development of the cars. And I mean, just give us a sense. I couldn't help but think when I was reading about the development, sort of the widespread adoption, I guess we should say, of cars in society, that one of the major sticking points in the libertarian presidential primary debates was the argument that we shouldn't have driver's licenses. Certainly the introduction of cars in the early 1900s, I can't remember the statistic off my top of my head, but the number of like deaths and pedestrian death. I mean, give us a sense of what was going on with cars as they were widely adopted.
Right. So one thing to point out is that the mass production and also the mass adoption of cars happened really quickly. I think the tipping point in terms of a majority of American families who owned a car, getting past the 50% tipping point was happened sometime in the mid-1920s. So the infiltration of cars in American society happened really quickly, and cities and towns throughout the country were not prepared for the influx of cars on their streets and highways. So that's one thing. And so what that led to was this mass chaos in terms of traffic jams, in terms of just all of the cars on the streets, but also, like you mentioned, traffic accidents. And the fatalities rate it was declared a national crisis by the Secretary of Commerce at the time, Herbert Hoover. There was one statistic that said that from 1913 to 1930, the death rate by car accidents increased, I want to say 400% or something like that, whereas death by all other types of accidents decreased 40%. And so the traffic accidents from cars made front page news on the New York Times and newspapers throughout the country. It was a really big deal. And immediately, towns and cities started regulating the operation of motor vehicles, including driver's licenses.
So we have this, we adopt basically regulations and laws on how to drive and what constitutes traffic violations for the safety of individuals, but we have no mechanism at that point to enforce it.
Exactly. And everybody violated traffic laws, and it was a huge crisis.
And so, so at that point, is it just like a ton of help wanted signs like we need more cops? I mean, like what happens at that point? Because this is the first, I mean, basically the introduction of technology. And on some level, like this is like the story of societies, right? I mean, the introduction of this technology creates a whole almost entire new universe of potential, like, obviously a lot of positives, but obviously a lot of potential negatives that only the state is able to step in and in any way, make it function in a way that, there has to be some type of, I guess, for lack of a better term, monopoly of force here. But there was literally no force to, I guess, execute that monopoly of force.
Right. So one of the main arguments that I make in the first half of my book is to show how American society as a whole shifted its very method of governing society because of cars. We went from a 19th century voluntary association, self-governance types of organizations that govern society to what I call 20th century police law enforcement as a mode of governance. So the problem of how to get people to obey traffic laws, right? How did American society get people to obey laws in the 19th century? It wasn't through police law enforcement. It was through voluntary associations like churches, trade unions, common law courts. People sued each other and, for trespass or contract violations or things like that. Those were the types of means used to make people obey norms of society. And in the first decade and two or so of the automobile, American society tried those 19th century forms of government to get people to obey traffic laws. They had associations like the California Development Association, the National Automobile Association, the Traffic Officials Association. All these different associations try to get together to try to convince people to obey laws. People volunteer to direct traffic. They had people. There was a safety pledge drive in California. They tried to get people to sign a safety pledge, pledging their honor that they would obey traffic laws. There was one county in California that put up a billboard saying our speed limit is 30 miles per hour. Be on your honor, obey it, so we don't need to hire more traffic cops. And so the whole premise of these voluntary associations is that that citizens are a part of a community and part of a local organization, and you could appeal to their reasonableness or their honor to follow the rules. And they tried that, and it didn't work. And so towns and cities had to hire more traffic cops. And what they were realizing was that all the fines that they could generate from traffic violations would pay for more traffic officers. And so that's how these modern day police departments grew. It was through traffic law enforcement.
So, and then, I mean, this is fascinating because they start as almost like these, like, you know, I guess, traffic cops.
Exactly.
And it becomes, you write, the first time that the law abiding, for lack of a better term, right? Like just sort of the average citizen who is not causing enough of a problem that other people say, hey, this guy's causing a problem, begin to have interactions with police on a regular basis.
Exactly. And it's actually law-abiding citizen is not, for lack of a better word, it's the phrase that they used themselves throughout the 20th century. What do we do with these law-abiding citizens who violate traffic laws? So it's that's a term that they use themselves, and one of the main arguments of my book is, you know, it's surprising to find that the development of modern policing began because of the need to discipline the respectable, ordinary, law-abiding citizen. It wasn't because of the need to discipline the poor or the foreigners or immigrants. The population that we focus on today in today's literature about the vulnerable population subject to policing. The history of policing, of modern policing, begins with this law-abiding citizenry.
That's fascinating. And then what turns is essentially starts with Carroll v. U.S., right? I mean, this is where, on some level, like is this the original sin? I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not even a sin, but this is where the dynamic changes, where essentially the court can't come up with a better way of doing this than basically allowing police discretion.
Exactly. Carroll versus the United States was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1925, and it was the U.S. Supreme Court's first car case. It actually came up before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1923, but the issue was so hard that they asked for another year. They asked the parties to argue the case again the next year, and they decided it in 1925. And the reason why the issue was so hard was because it's the juxtaposition of these two car stories, one about cars and freedom. It democratized transportation to a large numbers of the population. It was, the early adopters of cars were from the law-abiding class. So you have that story about cars and freedom and independence and all of that. But then you also have cars, and not just the need for policing, for traffic law regulation and enforcement, but you also have cars that really transformed the commission of crimes. The 1920s, which is when the mass adoption of cars is really gaining speed. 1920s also when national prohibition is becoming enforced, becomes the law of the land. And bootleggers' favorite mode of transporting their liquor was the car, right? The car is basically, one way to think about it is humongous movable container that can conceal liquor or other contraband. And it's easy to move boxes of liquor inside a car. And so you have law enforcement trying to enforce those laws as well. And so on the other hand, you want to be able to, the court wanted to be able to allow law enforcement to go after bootleggers, gangsters, and all that. So then there's these two different stories about the cars, two tensions that the court was trying to grapple with, and they had a really hard time grappling with it.
And that's the idea that one is like your property, it can't be searched, and the other is that it can't be searched without a warrant, I guess. And the other is that the mobility is such that you can't. It's tough to get a warrant because you go to the court and then
there's no time to go get one.
They drive off and deliver their liquor. And so the police are now armed with a certain discretion. And it's like the court's trying to split that difference between the British agents who would come by and just do a total fishing expedition, and the idea that that people could just drive off.
Exactly. So what the court did in the Carroll case was to say, we're going to create a warrant exception for cars, right? Just like you said, cars are private property, and so they are protected by the Fourth Amendment, which requires a specific warrant. But because of the specific, difficulties about cars, they're going to get rid of that warrant requirement, and the requirement is that the officer be able to articulate probable cause. If an officer believes that he or she has probable cause that there's evidence of a crime inside the car, they can stop and search the car without a warrant. And what the huge thing that decision does is that it transfers the decision of whether there is probable cause from a neutral judge over to an officer, and not just, and that's a huge shift for one thing, but also an officer on the road can decide at that moment whether to stop and search a car. And so I argue this is the first time that the court constitutionally recognizes the legitimacy of police discretionary powers.
And I mean, it's interesting. It just occurs to me that, that the sort of the solitude that I guess a police officer would do this in, right? I mean, this is, we're talking about on the road. It's not like there's a high amount of density necessarily, right, where this is happening, or is it? I mean, like the freedom that an officer has at that point seems to be pretty wide berth.
You mean the freedom to decide?
Yeah. Like
what
that.
To do?
Yeah. That.
Yeah. So the potential for abuse gets pointed out right after Carroll's decided. One commentator points out, the officer doesn't have to be 100% right that there's evidence of a crime inside the car, right? The standard is just probable cause, which allows room for an officer to be wrong about the fact that there might be evidence of a crime in a car. And so given that wiggle room, an officer could fudge the probable cause determination, right? He could have a mere hunch rather than probable cause, right? And if that decision gets challenged later in court, one of the commentators said right after the Carroll decision came out, there's something called judicial charity, where judges will be charitable towards the officer's determination of probable cause, especially if they're right, if they turned out to be right, that there was evidence of this crime in a car. So right after Carroll, commentators are criticizing the decision for giving too much power, putting too much power into the hands of police officers on the road. And this theme gets picked up again. It gets picked up in 1949 in another Supreme Court case, in a dissent written by Justice Jackson. And he outlines this pretty poignantly. He says, when an officer decides to stop a citizen on the side of the road, it's done in haste, right? A lot of these traffic stops, take place over a few minutes. There's nobody to oversee the whole process. And so the citizen who's pulled over can't ask for a neutral magistrate judge to make sure that everything's kosher. And if it's an innocent person who's stopped, and the police let that person go away, then the privacy violations already happened, and the innocent person can't challenge that police action because there's no evidence of crime to challenge. And so innocent people have to experience potentially unconstitutional searches and seizures without ever having a court of law review that. And if you're guilty and there is evidence of a crime, there's, what the commentator said in the 1920s, judicial charity. And so a court is likely to see what the police did as reasonable because, the police was right. There was evidence of a crime. And so Justice Jackson was worried about how the way that the Carroll decision played out in practice would erode Fourth Amendment rights in cars.
And the problem then becomes like there's really two scenarios where that erosion becomes really problematic. I mean, broadly, and that is one, you either get a bunch of police who are, who become obsessed with their power and decide to do this to everybody across the board, or it becomes a mechanism in which to I guess, act upon racial bias that you have, and that ends up being the problem.
Right, and we see that play out in the history of policing cars, and there's two stories several stories that are coming together at this point, and one is the criminal laws get developed over the 20th century. We had prohibition that lasted for a little over a decade. And then after that, we had various drug laws, which turned increasingly punitive after the 1970s. And so to enforce those laws, a lot of it which happened in the context of cars, officers need probable cause, and it's becoming increasingly easier to meet that standard of probable cause. But in a way, officers don't even need to articulate probable cause that there's evidence of a crime because, and this is the early history picking back up again, there's all these traffic laws that everybody's violating. And so the police can basically pull over anybody for a traffic violation. And in the starting in the 1950s, you see stories, or there are stories in the NAACP archives of the police using minor traffic violations to harass and abuse NAACP lawyers, activists. And one famous story is how Thurgood Marshall was pulled over for a pretextual stop, right? And Martin Luther King was pulled over for a speeding ticket. And there's all these stories in the NAACP archives of people who parked right outside the NAACP offices who were ticketed for a minor traffic violation. And so there's these stories about the stories of traffic law enforcement and criminal law enforcement are coming together at pretty early in the 20th century.
And so does this, I mean, it feels like this slippery slope, I guess, which was a slippery slope. I mean, on some level, that the only thing that in some way seemed to at least plateau it, I guess, was really in many respects the advent of cell phones. And perhaps, it seems like the case law has actually probably continued down that slope a little bit in terms of allowing police these powers. Not the least of which is their ability to confiscate goods if they suspect you involved in drugs in some instances, almost like a pre-punishment. But there's also, it seems to me, to be the problem that this dynamic this principle in terms of giving the police discretion crosses outside of traffic and cars into just policing more generally, like when you start to get like stop and frisk and stuff like that. Is that part of the story?
It is, and I talk about some of the new data privacy cases in my epilogue, because I do see old themes about the cars popping up in these new cases about smartphones and data privacy in interesting ways. And so, for example, one of the themes of these Fourth Amendment cases in the 20th century about policing cars, one of the common themes is every man or the law-abiding citizen, right? If the courts allow the police to do this, then that means that means that the police can also harass the everyman or the law-abiding citizen. And this was a theme that was made by Carroll in 1925. His lawyer argued, if you allow the police to do this, who else is going to be harassed? The rural postman, the milkman, the everyman. In 1949, Justice Jackson also said we have to treat the search of this bootlegger as a search of every man. And so there's this, because of the way that the car democratized mobility, lurking behind these court opinions is how is this court opinion also going to apply to everybody else? And I see that theme coming up again in the smartphone cases, where the court's opinions point out so many of us have smartphones, and the justices are probably thinking, I have one too, right? And so in the one of the last smartphone decisions, Riley versus California, the opinion points out like 90% of Americans own a smartphone. So whatever we allow the police to do in this case is going to affect everybody. So that's one of the themes that are coming up again. The other interesting theme that I see, which is kind of a deviation from the history of policing cars, is comes from one argument that I make in my book, that the conventional story that we have been told about the Fourth Amendment is a story of progress and triumph, where the courts have been in a position to expand individual rights and protect individuals from the police. That was a story I was told when I went to law school. And it's a story that really focuses on the Warren Court. The Warren Court was the court under the Chief Justice Earl Warren, mostly in the 1960s, one of the most liberal courts in U.S. history. That was the court that decided Brown v. Board of Education, that eliminated or said segregation in public schools was unlawful or unconstitutional. And the Warren Court was also the court that started the due process revolution. Right? We call it a revolution because the court basically started applying the U.S. Constitution, which only applies to the federal government. They started applying it to local police officers. And so the U.S. Supreme Court started policing the police, and it was a huge revolution. And it's a story of triumph, basically. That was a story that I've had for ever since in law school. And what I realized when I read all those cases, those landmark cases that we celebrate for protecting individual rights, all of those cases don't have anything to do with policing cars. They're all about protecting the home or the house, which is the most protected space in constitutional law. And when I started looking at all the other Fourth Amendment cases that even the Warren Court decided about policing cars, it's in the car cases where the court actually expanded the police's discretionary power. So my book kind of revises a little bit the standard story about what the courts did in terms of developing the Fourth Amendment in the 20th century. So I go into all of this to say how the smartphone jurisprudence is deviating from the history of policing cars. What the court said in one of the last smartphone cases is to say smartphones is actually not like cars. Usually anything that you could put into a car is considered part of a car search. Like if you have a purse inside your car, that can be searched as part of a car search. And so one would think that a smartphone in your car could be searched as, it's found inside the car. But instead what the court said was, a smartphone is more like your house because it contains books. It contains more books than the smartphone has more books than many people have in their homes. It contains medical records that you might keep a safeguard in your home. It has conversations with friends and text, and conversations with friends can happen in the home. So what the court did was to say smartphones are not like cars, it's more like houses. And therefore, we're going to require a warrant if the police want to search your smartphone. And so that metaphor of is it more like a car or is it more like a house still shapes how the court decides whether the Fourth Amendment is going to apply to different and new technologies.
Fascinating. The book is Policing the Open Road, How Cars Transformed American Freedom. Sarah Seo, thank you so much for your time today. We'll put a link to the book on majority.fm.
Thank you so much. This was a great pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I thought I did well, too. Are you familiar with the Catch a Killer box? Great fun for you and your family. And most importantly, you were talking about screens. No screens. Traditional fun board game. It's a board game.
All right, folks, we're going to go to the fun half where we will do what we do. Play sound, give you some stories. Going to give you an update on what's going on in Ecuador and some context around the uprising there. Obvious point, but worth making. How much romance and focus on the Hong Kong protests in the U.S. press, and basically none to very little on the Ecuadorian protests, and certainly not what it is covered as a question of basic urgency for the democratic and economic rights of, as an example, the indigenous people of Ecuador. Look up Chomsky. All right, so we'll do all of that in the fun half. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this whole thing happens. Your support is vitally needed for all enterprises. Solidarity with our friends at Splinter, terrible news, and a real reminder about the importance of independent media and your role in it. Check out justcoffee.coop. Fair trade, tea, coffee, or chocolate. On Tuesday's Michael Brooks Show, we had a really interesting debate with Sagar and Jetty about China and the difference between nationalism and democratic socialism as a framework for understanding the world. Heidi Sloan, DSA candidate in Texas's 25th. We talked about ending homelessness, farming, Medicare for all, and I gave an intro to the idea of hegemony, Gramsci, and what that actually means for real political work in the 21st century, plus Ecuador and a whole bunch else. We really cover a huge amount of ground. Next week, instead of Tuesday, because there's going to be a presidential debate, we're going to have a Wednesday show, and that will be pretty heavy on the recap. Crystal Ball is going to call in, regular on our show from Rising. We're going to talk about it, and then Ryan Grimm is going to join us in studio. Patreon.com/TMBS.
AKA he of Jesse Waters' nightmares.
He of Jesse Waters' nightmares. We will probably spend 30 minutes recounting him stepping to the extremely unfunny Jesse Waters. And also this weekend for patrons, patreon.com/TMBS, a primer and illicit history of Narendra Modi and the Indian authoritarian moment, how it sells itself globally. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Also, guys, we're about to be a month out from the Philadelphia live show, and that is usually, for whatever reason, for TMBS live shows, there's a huge spike out of the gate. Then there's like a steady, slow pace of like a couple a day. And then a lot of people seem to like to wait the last couple of weeks. And sometimes that actually does mean like, you know, it's a tricky situation if you come to the door as an example. So I would go click on the link we have on the Majority.fm homepage and get your tickets to World Cafe, November 23rd, Michael Brooks Show live. Matt, talk to us.
Yeah, folks, check out Literary Hangover. All the episodes are up on YouTube, so subscribe to that if you prefer that as your medium.
How many subs do you have on YouTube now?
I think close to 3,000. Slowly up there.
Nice.
I mean, it's just the audio thing. I am going to do some... I'm skeptical of Twitch. I do want to get to Twitch, but I also might do some streaming Let's Play style on my Literary Hangover YouTube page. So go check that out, folks. Subscribe.
Awesome. See you guys in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Degeneres song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Degeneres.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych. Fuck 'em.
Almost says what? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Hey, folks, reminder, this episode is brought to you by Blinkist. The Blinkist app takes the key takeaways from thousands of best-selling nonfiction books and condenses them down into just 15 minutes for you to read or listen to. 10 million people are using Blinkist right now. It has a massive and growing library from self-help and business to health and history books. Check it out. Right now, you, as a Majority Report listener, can get 25% off your first year at Blinkist at Blinkist.com/majority. Blinkist.com/majority. Hey, folks, just a reminder, this show is sponsored by Hunt a Killer. Hunt a Killer is the murder mystery subscription box that immerses you in an ongoing detective experience. With every delivery, you're going to sift through an elaborate case file and evidence. You'll eliminate suspects until you crack the case and catch the killer. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. Hurry, take advantage of this offer, embrace your inner detective. huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. That's huntakiller.com/majority.
We're on the fun half. Michael Brooks here. Whew. We somehow need to trick Sam into reading an ad for the fish oil supplement that Gorka promotes. All right, let's.
And what it does is it helps my back.
You're calling from a 308 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 308. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski from Nebraska. How are you doing, man?
Oh, kind of under the weather. Not to mention it's blowing 30 miles outside, and it's got to be like 20 with the wind chill.
Jesus.
Winter has come.
Not good.
No, but hey, just wanted to call in and say I really did appreciate TMBS last week. You guys mentioned the plight of farmers. It's pretty nice to hear people outside of this area talking about it. So,
oh, of course. Absolutely.
That was pretty much all. But...
Oh, appreciate it. Believe it or not, like I grew up in a part of Massachusetts where there are farmers. It's kind of funny. Like most parts of the country, have farmers. You don't need to really go. Like, you could drive a couple hours out of New York City.
To be kind of fair, Nebraska is, larger.
It's a bigger deal. Like, yes, for sure.
Yeah, all of New England. So
for sure, larger in land mass, not character.
Certainly not people.
Yes.
Hey, whoa.
Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Shots fired, man.
All right, Kowalski, rest up, drink some tea, maybe a little bit of whiskey. Knock it out of your system. Thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. And I definitely will be doing more of that kind of coverage.
God bless Free Lula.
God bless Free Lula. There we go. I would see. People are always like, Michael's doing patient with callers.
Oh,
not when they're good.
I want to just make a slight, not apology, but I mean, I didn't illustrate it, but there's a photo of the Letter Hack podcast that he did of all of us. I believe it's a play on Queer Eye.
Oh, I've seen this photo.
Because we were doing, I said that I think everybody should get a Queer Eye style makeover to help with alienation under our late capitalist society.
Oh.
Right.
Well, that's good. But I'm holding the Lula photo and not Michael.
I noticed that, and it's a great piece. And it's so funny. I'm like truly confused. I was so confused that I was wondering if it wasn't Lula, because the artwork is so detailed that there's an Adidas stripe on my tux. So this guy seems like he's pretty informed about the show. But then Brendan, I mean, look, I think Brendan loves Lula too.
Oh, for sure.
But I don't know if he'd be the one to hold the photo. I was
I
a little thrown by that
about it, but it was a great illustration.
It was a great illustration, and it was a tremendous point.
I want that gamer hat too.
All right, let's play some sounds. This is Donald Trump echoing basically what Turkey is threatening. Turkey is saying, if you even use the rhetoric of occupation, which this 1,000% is, if you as the Europeans use this rhetoric, we will open up, we will basically turn over 3 million Syrian refugees into Europe. Now, the story behind this is a partnership. The Europeans cut a deal with Turkey to absorb about 3.6 million Syrian refugees fleeing the Syrian civil war. Now, in Turkey, number one, they're living in mostly very bad conditions. But they've also, as communities do, they've proliferated across Turkey and Istanbul and so on. So there's a political volatility to it, and there is a rising xenophobic sentiment towards Syrians in Turkey as well. This is a very classical European move, right? Like, let's instigate something, have an incoherent but hawkish policy, then sort of discurse humanitarian concerns, and then hopefully outsource the problem somewhere else. Now, the migration situation overall in Europe is different and in some ways more complicated. I think that would be foolish to not acknowledge that. However, there's a whole set of deals like this. And even if you look at the work with Omar al-Bashir, the former Sudanese leader who was wanted internationally for war crimes, goes from being a pariah of the sort of do-gooder international community, and rightfully so, to somebody that is being worked with closely to terrorize African migrants and keep migration flows from moving from Africa through the Mediterranean. So Erdogan is basically saying, if you even use rhetoric I don't like about the slaughter that I'm commencing in northern Syria, in the Kurdish areas, and again, there's nothing, it's happening right in front of your face. And in 2018, the same thing happened in Afrin, except it was the Russians that sold out the Kurds instead of the Americans. Now, Afrin, the Kurds gave up on more quickly because it was more geographically isolated, and they chose to withdraw. But they went in, they slaughtered civilians, they brought people out of their homes, and the idea was, frankly, to re-engineer the population so it wasn't a Kurdish-dominated city. And they cut a deal with the Russians, who had been partnering with the Kurds in that area. The Russians sold the Kurds out, and now Donald Trump and the Americans sell the Kurds out. This is Donald Trump echoing, in his own way, some of the same talking points that Erdogan has, except this is specifically with regards to ISIS captives.
Steve?
These ISIS fighters escape and pose a threat elsewhere.
Well, they're going to be escaping to Europe. That's where they want to go. They want to go back to their homes, but Europe didn't want them from us. We could have given it to them. They could have had trials. They could have done whatever they wanted. But as usual, it's not reciprocal. You know my favorite word, reciprocal. That's all I want. I don't want an edge. I just want reciprocal. And it's not reciprocal, Steve. It's not a fair deal for the United States. And when President Obama took the PKK, when they bring in PKK, that's a tough deal because that's been a mortal enemy of Turkey. So when you bring them into a partnership, it's a tough situation because it's tough for Turkey. It's probably tough for them. They've hated each other for many, many years, for hundreds of years. I mean, it's amazing when you look at history and you look at culture, but you look at the length of the time and the fighting for so long.
It's always clear who this fucking moron's been talking on the phone with.
Yeah, and that thing about they've been fighting these battles for millennium, that is vintage Iraq War, minimize the Iraq War
That's
pablum.
it. Well, that's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is just intractable.
It's nobody's fault. It's just their history.
It's just history. They're just living in history, man. Oh, the Israelis just bombed a UN school. I mean, well, that's
been going on for 2,000 years.
Going on for I remember, 2,000 years ago, the Muslims bombed a UN school. So, look, again, let's just do a little bit of primer. The Kurds are systemically oppressed in Turkey. They have been historically. In fact, there was actually some real reforms with both negotiating with the PKK and introducing some basic cultural autonomy and rights for the Kurds in the first Erdogan administrations. That abruptly started to shift in 2015 because of another piece of the story here. The HDP, which is a social democratic party which advocates not only for Kurdish rights, but also really for social democracy and labor and feminism and ecology in Turkey, they performed very well in elections. Since then, their leaders have been made political prisoners by the Erdogan regime, and they've been criminalized as a party. And there is no meaningful opposition to this because the other, the traditional Turkish parties, Erdogan is not a traditional Turkish leader. He came from the emergent Muslim wing, which was violently opposed by the Turkish secular Ataturk tradition. But the Ataturk tradition does not has even more deplorable policies towards the Kurds. In fact, it was reported today that every single former living prime minister has called up, or president. Prime Minister Erdogan, I believe, is the president now. He had served as prime minister. That there's been some sort of rejiggering of roles to expand his power. But former Turkish leaders have called him and affirmed their support for these operations. There is a uniformity of nationalism and brutality to the Kurds in Turkish politics. Again, has the PKK, going back in decades of struggle, engaged in what we could call terrorism? And I'll say really specifically, terrorism, in my view, is a targeting of civilian targets, period. And we have to say that is wrong. We have to say that is wrong, by the way, period. And that, of course, implicates the United States as a major global war criminal. It certainly implicates Israel. It certainly implicates Turkey. It certainly implicates India. Probably not a single major nation state. And groups of people resisting have an absolute right, even under international law, if they're dealing with a foreign occupier, which I guess in the PKK's case it would not be. But they certainly have a moral legitimacy in fighting occupying armies and engaging militarily and guerrilla and subversion that way. I have no problem with that whatsoever. And I think if you're sitting in somewhere like the United States and you're passing judgment on that, I think that's delusional and ridiculous. Targeting specifically of civilians absolutely needs to be condemned categorically, no matter who's doing it, and the PKK has done that at certain times. However, their broader claim is correct. The Kurds are oppressed, period. And also, the PKK and the SDF are not precisely the same thing. There is overlap. There is shared directional leadership from Öcalan, who, by the way, is in prison. So there is some operational constraints on the supposed uniformity of this coalition here. Öcalan is in jail. He is in a Turkish prison. In fact, oddly enough, he was allowed to release a letter by Erdogan a couple of months ago before the mayoral elections in Istanbul. But he is not operationally in control. He has let his followers know that his intellectual, his political ideology has shifted radically because he read a Brooklyn-born, Vermont-living anarchist named Murray Bookchin. And and that has significantly changed the experiment in Rojava. And we can absorb. By the way, I don't understand when people, this whole language of perfection is crazy to me. Yes, literally nobody is. First of all, no thing is perfect. I guess, unless we're talking about Platonic forms or something.
Yeah. Okay, Aristotle.
Yeah. Right. All right. Oh, look at big shot Aristotle over here.
Plato.
Plato said it was perfect. It was perfect. So. And, are the Kurds savvy at PR? Have they made mistakes? Do some people over-romanticize them? Obviously. But is this an enormously positive development and an experiment in the overall grand scheme of Kurdish autonomy and rights as well as political innovation? Obviously. I mean, that's just undeniable in terms of reality.
It's amazing when you look at history.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. So when you look at history, it's amazing in a certain sense. So, I think that it's very important at the very least now to not echo Turkish or Trump talking points about what's happening while we are literally mid-slaughter. Now, if people in the United States who were supposedly supportive of the Kurds in a genuine sense and not just as partners against ISIS, and people like Marco Rubio could care less about the slaughter or the political experiment, it goes without saying, and all of the mainline Democrats and everything else, then yes, as Mark Ames pointed out, you would have to look at supporting a broader diplomatic process, which almost certainly would involve some type of partnership with Assad. Again, even as Assad is a war criminal. The reality of a lot of these situations is that agreements are going to be established between people who have blood on their hands. That's what the former South African president, Thabo Mbeki, said in 2012 at the outset. He said, the international community comes in, and let's be real, it is usually Europeans demanding an arrest of primarily Africans. But in this case, it is people rightfully saying, yes, Assad is putting down a rebellion. He's committing crimes against humanity. He runs an authoritarian regime. All of these things, by the way, are undeniable. I don't have any time for, trying to whitewash the nature of the Assad government. That's ridiculous. But he also has a serious coalition and constituency behind him. That has been endlessly proven. And some of the opposition was leftist and organic. That was crushed and smoked out, and as well as the popular uprising. And then the classic pattern, the CIA and the Gulf states end up funneling a huge amount of money to far-right Muslim groups with a agenda that certainly if you were a religious minority in Syria, you'd be terrified of, and not just of ISIS. That's also reality. So, and Mbeki's point was when he was negotiating in back-channel negotiations to end apartheid, if the international community came in and arrested F.W. de Klerk and other apartheid leaders, would they be right? Definitionally, if you head the apartheid regime, you're guilty of multiple crimes against humanity. But Thabo was like, I can't have them go. They're my negotiating partners. This is a political process. We need to actually establish a deal here. And, similarly, in a real, actual situation, that may be the only pivot point. And that was, of course, would be blocked by the United States because that's still U.S. policy to have this regime change effort, even under Trump, even as that actually hasn't even practically been the policy going back to 2014 and 15 when all of the military effort turned and focused on ISIS. So it's incoherent. Bottom line is that this is an act of Turkish imperialism. This is horrific on a humanitarian level, and we should have solidarity with the Rojava Kurds. This was pretty funny. Ellen DeGeneres, and I'm sorry, I know this is tough for Matt. Matt's a big Ellen fan. So,
the great writing
on Ellen's show. Controversially, and he can't defend himself because he's not on mic, and I feel weird because I don't know Dorsey that well, but Dorsey said to me once, I didn't know about this until recently, but Dorsey said, Ellen really proved that the writing quality in the Writers Union was overhyped when she fired her Writers Guild writers and replaced them with non-union writers. Because he said the writing on the show is still so good. She's so funny. Dorsey said that to me.
I was surprised she even needed writers because she's such a genius.
Right. No, I mean, that's the thing. You look at the kind of talent that Ellen brings to the table. I mean, what do you need? Does Jordan need somebody else playing for him?
You know that thing where you're like family with your writing staff and then they go on strike and you join them for one day and then the next day you come back with an entirely new family to write with?
Family.
Yeah, exactly, like family.
Like a 1950s sales guy who had another family in another state. Okay. Ellen DeGeneres, we talked about it. She had a selfie with George W. Bush. I had plenty of thoughts on it. Unfortunately, I really hated that she did this whole spiel about how we need to build bridges with each other because I actually think there's some real truth to that. I don't think any actual bridges need to be built between two union-busting members to 1%. I think they're already happily established, even if they have, different policies. I mean, shockingly enough, I think it's pretty clear that Ellen does not care about, the millions of deaths caused by George W. Bush as a war criminal, but or she sees it as no worse than wearing fur or something. But I mean, she's even cool with overlooking the fact that the guy campaigned on writing her second-class status into the Constitution. So, okay, I guess more power to her. But this was a brilliant remix of Ellen's comments.
Yeah, by Raphael Shimunov on Twitter, and he posted this, and then it got DMCA'd for copyright violation, which is complete BS because this is a textbook transformative use of work. So it's definitely covered by the First Amendment, although these companies don't really care about that stuff.
Oh, of course not.
Basically, we should just explain for people listening that he puts behind Ellen images from the Iraq War.
This is powerful.
11, and but a lot of people were mad, and they did what people do when they're mad. They tweet, and but here's one tweet that I loved. This person says, "Ellen and George Bush together makes me have faith in America again." And exactly. Here's the thing. I'm friends with George Bush. In fact, I'm friends with a lot of people who don't share the same beliefs that I have. We're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay that we're all different. For instance, I wish people wouldn't wear fur. I don't like it, but I'm friends with people who wear fur. And I'm friends with people who are furry.
And I think we can pause it there
That
with
is
the
perfect.
the guy at Abu Ghraib.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because it distracts from, again, the power of her writing staff. She was moving into some really primo furry material.
Yeah. Tulsi Degeneres 2020.
Leaf Sage, Michael, decades from now, after living the life of a scholar and taking on so many important high-level ideas, I think it would be most appropriate to write on your tombstone, entering recovery mode. Any thoughts? My sincere thought is I don't know I want my tombstone to be a Dave Rubin joke.
quote.
Yeah, I might need to draw the line there.
Michael cares more about spirituality than to do that to himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you entered the bardo state. Whoa, what is this? Whoa.
I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Do you remember
Ruben in the Bardo?
Ruben in the Bardo. Well, I actually remember one time my version of No Exit, and no offense to anybody, I love John from San Antonio. I love Sam, but No Exit might be either John and Sam talk about polls for eternity. Again, great for 20 minutes, not eternity. Or not great even for 2 minutes would be, could you imagine No Exit with like Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson? Whoa.
It's like the IDW.
That is
a
nightmare.
It's like you open up your laptop and every single time it's streaming some IDW content.
You're right. You are literally choosing to put yourself in No Exit. Contagious Chameleon, fascinating interview. Capitalist products negatively affects democracy and generates a police state. Yep. Let's see. Waterboat from Kashmir. No update from Kashmir today. The chairperson of the collective separatist parties had asked Kashmiris to do a number of things, one of which was to show solidarity with other oppressed, marginalized people in the world. From one oppressed people, the Kashmiris, to another people struggling for identity, the Kurds, solidarity. I truly hope that one day we will see the rising sun that shines on the tree and not the beat down upon the oppressed. Yes. Secret Identity Politics. Fantastic interview. It's my New Year's resolution to find something new I can blame cars on every day. So thanks for that. Yeah, cars are really bad news, folks.
Yeah, Henry Ford killed the entire planet, folks.
Wow. Well, looks like our first pedant nerd box I am of the day. Take a deep breath and get into it. Dr. Chaos MD. Does anyone honestly believe that wait a second. I apologize, Dr. Chaos. I misread it. I'm totally misread it. I need to reset it. Yep. It's unbelievable if you look at history. My bad. This is actually really good. I am. Sorry. Dr. Chaos MD. Does anyone honestly believe the Dallas PD on the murder of Joshua Brown? I literally misread it as like, are you honestly saying that they, did
You think cops would murder?
Yeah, so again, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. Not only is it highly unlikely that the only person that DA could get to testify against Guy Garrick would be a drug dealer who kept pounds of weed in his apartment, and it is highly convenient that he was murdered before he would testify in a civilian trial. civil trial. Also, how much do you want to bet that the people who Brown's murder is being pinned on end up giving testimony through a plea deal, which gets used by Guaigar's legal team to discredit Brown's testimony and throw out her conviction and get her appeal overturned on appeal. Jesus. Also, on a different topic, we encourage people to thank troops for their service, but I think we should be apologizing to them instead. We've sent soldiers to senseless wars to be killed and maimed, and don't take care of them well enough when they come back. We betray all of the work, all the people they work on within the ground to keep them safe. It's truly shameful. Yeah, I actually kind of like that.
With regards to the Dallas PD.
And they had the worst cover-up ever.
But that was a deeper take on it than I'd heard before.
No, that's really smart.
Terrifying.
That was a terrifying and very insightful take. I buy it. And it's also worth noting wherever there is a Trump Tower, there's likely oligarch money being laundered and therefore leverage on Trump. Absolutely. And there is, in fact, the Trump Tower in Istanbul.
2 of them, I think.
2.
Usually it's the tower, but these are the towers.
All right, let's... Oh, we're a little low on sound today, guys. Let's
we don't have enough sound.
Let's actually go to what is this what is number 9? Okay, this is a fascinating take. I really wonder when normal people watch this on Fox News, like, setting aside that plenty of people on Fox who watch Fox actually, I think, do have pretty relatively high incomes. This flies in the face of just everything. I mean, we know all of the actual trends about wages have been stagnant for 40 years, the disconnect between wages and productivity, skyrocketing corporate and shareholder profits. Then we know that there was a global meltdown caused by Wall Street. Wall Street was bailed out. Millions of people lost their homes and their wealth. We know all of this. But then even you feel it. If you have a kid, you almost certainly experience them like, oh, by the time I was their age, I had a house, blah, 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 blah. They can't afford any of these things, even if they're working full time. That is the vast majority of the experience for most, including like privileged people. So, it's one thing to do there's 2 moves. There's, the libertarian fantasy world, which is we just have to keep going and make things worse and worse and worse. And then somehow it will magically become better. And then there's the smart move, which is the Tucker Carlson Holly move, which is let's start selling some, and Trump move, let's start selling some fake populism. Then there's the David Webb move, which is that if you're a worker, we are already living in that worker's paradise.
I went through this, released by Team Warren, by Elizabeth Warren, and read it. It reads like a pre-debate marketing piece of selling to a base. She's rising on Biden. She needs that support from SEIU and the other various unions. She highlights something in there that actually says more about what's happening in America that's good. Union enrollment, 35, now down to 10% in the country. How did that happen? The workplace has changed. The fact is that workers' rights are codified in law. EEOC, lots of protections across states, lots of protections in corporate policy. And yeah, are there issues? There always will be issues. But she can't fight against the reality and the evolution of the workplace in America, and of the work environment. So she has to do that and cobble together. I took one of the paragraphs she highlighted. I didn't have time to look through for my copy of the Communist Manifesto, but it reads that she talks about removing supervisory hierarchy in the workplace so workers have more control. Sound amazingly similar to Marx and Engels. This is cobbled together pre-debate.
You know what I love about these guys is they say the Communist Manifesto is not the piece where he talks about his ideas about how it would work. In fact, there's very few Marx pieces about how this would actually work, because Capital is an economic and history book and a critique Communist Manifesto is like it's like a marketing document. I mean, it's just hilarious. Also, what Elizabeth Warren has been talking about, which I think, frankly, is a lot less interesting than the worker cooperative model that Bernie's putting forward, and less democratic, but still would be an improvement on the status quo. Although workers would still get outvoted in this situation because they wouldn't have a majority of seats. But she's talking more of like a German model of like things like board representation. So I guess if you think the way like BMW is organized in North Germany is the Communist Manifesto, but then again, maybe he does because David Webb is a fucking idiot.
That's what's so clarifying about this Hong Kong stuff, which is like not even get into the politics of what's actually going on between China and Hong Kong. You look at what's happening here between Blizzard yesterday. Blizzard employees walked out of work yesterday over the company's decision to ban a pro-Hong Kong professional Hearthstone player.
Right.
The reason for management is not freedom; it's for authoritarian discipline by the capitalists, so they can make you do what they want you to do. So like Daryl Morey, and that's the thing with we're kind of getting on China a little bit early, but what good is the money if you can't say what you want to say about stuff like that?
Precisely.
Like, what's it for at a certain point?
Precisely.
And you have like Adam Silver trying to like figure out how to walk both those things. But yeah, I don't know. Like that's what the management is there for: authoritarian discipline, not freedom.
I mean, clearly. I mean, look. The greatest lesson in this micro example of the NBA and Blizzard, and look, I mean, there's literally tens of millions of examples of this. I guess even just going back to, if you wanted to, Chile in 1973. But like, capitalism does not bring democracy. That is just endlessly
opposed.
They are opposed, and and the idea, by the way, that people are so enthusiastic about eliminating democracy in the workplace would somehow be ultra enthusiastic about it in the civic sphere, when they think that A, basically everything should be run privately, B, there should be no democracy in workplace, C, like, how is that going to graft on to some type of broader democratic view? It's delusional.
Yeah. Who's making
capitalism is anti-democracy.
Who's
Read
making
history?
Who's making the decisions? Is it a democratic body of workers or the common people, or is it a capitalist? That's all it is to it.
Precisely. I want to talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders, and I don't know if we had a chance, I don't think on this show, to play the best ad of the cycle so far, which was done in a grassroots fashion for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, again, I pointed this out yesterday. When he talks about slowing his schedule down a little bit, that would mean he's going at about the same pace as Kamala Harris or Beto. He is doing 4 or 5 rallies a day. He has been a bigger leader on, look, no one has achieved more than Bernie Sanders in the last several years. He's remade American politics to the left. He has done more to put Yemen, look, the Yemen war, the Yemen genocide, the U.S. participates in every day with the Saudis, would have stopped if it was not for a Trump veto. That's his work. Amazon has raised their workers' wages. That's his work. He's been in solidarity, everything from the Walmart board to assembling a campaign of over 1 million volunteers, the largest grassroots fundraising effort in history, and 4 or 5 rallies a day. So if he says he's going to do 2 rallies a day, that does not mean that he is not a main presidential contender, and not, of course, the obvious choice if you're on the actual left and you have some seriousness about labor power, about a Green New Deal. If you care a whit about foreign policy, you will be supporting this guy. And, and he came out today and he said, and I'll quote now from NBC News, Senator Bernie Sanders on Wednesday tamped down speculation that he would slow his presidential campaign after he suffered a heart attack last week, saying he plans to compete as vigorously as ever for the 2020 nomination. The Vermont Independent told NBC in an exclusive interview airing Wednesday night on Nightly News and on Thursday today that his health care has only strengthened his resolve. I misspoke the other day. I said a word I should not have said, and the media drives me a little bit nuts to make a big deal about it, Sanders said in an interview along with his wife, Jane. We're going to get back in the groove of a very vigorous campaign. I love doing the rallies and I love doing town meetings. I want to start off slower and build up and build up and build up. This also, his daughter-in-law has died in the last couple of days. She's only 46 years old of cancer. The media coverage of him during this period has been absolutely ghoulish and disgusting. If you look at Cindy Ember's just atrocious reporting in the New York Times, it's a great example. And of course, it makes sense. She's class enemy. She's a rich kid. That's it. There's no mystery here. And this is why we can pretend that there's an equal fear with Warren and all of that. And I'm not saying that there might. Look, Warren would certainly be an inconvenience. But this is a fundamental structural threat, and through a democratic means. And that's not an opportunity to fuck around with if you're serious. And I think what also gets my passion about this is between the equivocating and the lies and some of the anti-Semitism and just the general weirdness and grotesqueness around Sanders relative to what they are actually trying to do and what they have put on the table, from medical debt cancellation, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, pulling troops out of the Middle East, peace, some actual steps for recognizing Palestinian humanity, full student debt cancellation. The list just goes on and on and on. If you had any moral seriousness on the foreign policy alone, which they have the most power out of the gate, the decision would already be made. But I think it's also this dynamic that was captured in this guy. What's his name? Matt
Orfalea?
Just the disjuncture. Look, you can choose not to vote for Bernie Sanders. You're not obligated to like anybody, but really, this is the most decent person in decades of U.S. politics. And it's not, I disagree because I don't want to change things so much, or I have more of a belief in markets or whatever. It's a pathological and grotesque hatred for him, which is a representation of hatred for America's working class as a whole.
Yeah, and if you send one bit of, frankly, campaign propaganda to somebody you're trying to sway to the Bernie side, I think it should be this video.
Watch this and then get on the phone bank.
Is back, getting into the presidential race.
Democrats like somebody new, and that is not going to be Bernie Sanders this time.
It's really hard to imagine who the Bernie Sanders voter is at this point.
Bernie Sanders, fall back. Please get away from us.
Hey, Senator, great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
He has a kind of gruff, curmudgeon-y side that is, of course, well known. He doesn't actually smile that much.
It's almost like Bernie can't tell the difference between kids and adults.
All right, I think you're dumb. I think you're dumb if you don't sit down and learn how to read and write. No, you were not born stupid. Come here. The only way I think you're dumb, I think when you think you're dumb, because you're not.
I think you're disheveled, you're unlikable, and you're pushy, and I don't think you should be leading anybody.
Pause it. I have no idea who that person is. I mean, my guess would be is she's some trust fund kid who's doing horrifyingly bad open mics. And the real question is why is she on television? Who the hell is she? And God, just what a just sort of disgusting, despicable display there.
Bad.
Likable and you're pushy, and I don't think you should be leading anybody.
How old is too old?
I think the issue is, do you seem like you're in the contemporary world? He's a socialist from the 1950s yelling at people in the same screechy voice, without smiling, without any kind of personal connection. He looked like the angry man in the center of the stage saying, "Get off my lawn." I don't think that's a good look for the Democratic Party.
Watch it. Make calls. Knock on doors. This is an unparalleled opportunity. Stop messing around. Let's do it, folks. All right. Let's get back to the calls. You are calling from a 408 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? .408, are you there? You are calling from a 416 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 416, are you there? Is there a problem with the system? 416?
Hey, this is Eric from Toronto.
Hey, Eric, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, just at work. Love the show. You guys are killing it.
Thanks,
Michael,
man.
great job going to the mat for Bernie. Much respect.
Much respect. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think it's helpful that, like, you know, the disintegration of the labor movements over the decades leaves people, you know, just not certain of just basic fundamental concepts, right? Like the difference between proposing something and advocating for something. And I think it's clear, like, would clarify to kind of explain the difference. And it's not semantic. If you give me like 30 seconds.
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. Noam Chomsky has a lot more work on this, way better than I can articulate. But like, you know, it's great to propose things and, you know, come up with ideals to fight towards. But when it comes to the political realm, have true, no bullshit advocating for policies that we want to see enacted in our present day life requires like a serious step-by-step concrete plan of action people can take to get from point A to point B. And when proposing really, you know, good faith goals that we can work towards in the long term, like open borders or the abolishment of wage labor, those are great propositions and things to get stoned and theorize about. But, you know, true advocation, like, you know, you do extremely well with Bernie's policies, is, you know, much like really serious. And I think it's really important to distinguish the differences, and you do a great job of it. So yeah, keep up the good work.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Yeah, take it easy. Bye.
You're calling from a 281 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
Yeah, this is you. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, so I'm Tony, and I'm from Illinois.
Sorry, what is it?
And I basically just want
What's your name?
I'm from Illinois, Tony.
Tony.
Tony from Illinois.
Okay, Tony. What's on your mind?
Yep. So I'm going to do the third Chomsky reference here. I remember not long ago you guys played a video of him talking to a journalist. And I'm actually a local journalist, like a local news reporter, just out of journalism school, that kind of thing.
Cool.
And I really just wanted to talk about, you know, really the mechanism by which, you know, the way that media is structured that makes editorial independence really, like, difficult. And that you do have to push certain times for, you know, to cover stories that would otherwise not be covered.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I'm sitting on a story on a actual candidate for Congress who, former sex worker, Medicare for All, Green New Deal, and it's just been a horrible fight with my editor about that.
You mean just even profile the candidate?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
just
wow.
even, you know, I did a Q&A with her and did that thing, but, you know, there's sort of this ingrained conservatism in a lot of newspapers and a lot of news organizations. And, you know, it's actually really sad to see a place like Splinter end up, you know, in the place that it is now.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's really sad, honestly.
It is. Oh, it's terrible. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I guess I saw your interview with Sargar. Is that how you say his name, from The Hill TV?
Sagar.
And
wait, you saw it, or you said you
you
see that I'm going to do it? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I saw the one that you did.
On Tuesday.
I think,
on TBS. Mm-hmm.
He gave me very Strathmite vibes, like very much. I mean, he called himself a nationalist a couple times, and I just wanted to get your take on you know, what you think that sort of new conservatism is going to be in the coming.
Well, I would say he did not give me Strassrite vibes. He gave me Strassrite vibes. I would not have him on the show. I mean, whoever taught people the word Strassrite should be drowned. because it is very
Okay, well,
over,
I mean, like, sort of
it's like
capitalist,
over and
I guess,
inappropriate. I've
the
heard
real
it used like, look, you can disagree with Angela Nagel. She's not a Strasserite. I mean, the Strasserites was a specific, they were literally leftists, so-called leftists who were actual building a fake propaganda left flank of the actual Nazi party, not like literally Hitler's Germany. So, I mean, far be it from me to say, because I'm all about like, throwing around rhetoric at times, but like that is a crazily and almost always inappropriately used term. But to answer your question,
well, that's good to know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Sagar, look, a friend of mine, I think it was an interesting debate, and we have, I know we have just systemic and fundamental massive differences in terms of,
absolutely.
I want a multipolar world. He still wants an American national state, an American imperial order. And I think that what was interesting in the conversation for me was when I brought up the example of the Thomas Friedman, and people should watch it. I'm sorry to get too much into this, but the point being that there was this love-in on CNBC between Thomas Friedman and Steve Bannon, who supposedly represent, Thomas Friedman is a globalist and, Steve Bannon is a hard nationalist and all this nonsense. And they were both singing from the same hymn book on getting tough on China. And Steve Bannon is talking about the U.S. rules-based world and all this stuff that supposedly he and Trump are uprooting. And I actually think the bottom line is that the new nationalism is a lot like the old nationalism, and I think the difference it has with the neoliberal order is that amongst people who are sincere, which are very few, I think Sagar is sincere. Yeah. There is a concern about things like monopoly power and U.S. worker power, which is laudable in an area for cooperation in certain areas, but it's actually quite revealing that internationally there is not a vision of how you actually start to practically build bonds internationally to empower workers everywhere, and you really start to recognize that it isn't Chinese capital versus American capital.
Yeah, no.
It's capital. It's the
capital
issue.
In general.
Yeah, so I think that those conversations are, to me, they're interesting and clarifying, and they're also a more relevant debate than, finagling around Google searches to try to prove, silly points that don't really matter.
Well,
I think they're big structural.
If I could get back to sort of that journalism aspect of it.
Yes.
What do you think, I haven't read Bernie's plan on, how you actually get journalism to not be the same way that it is.
Right.
But, clearly there's a problem. There's, we need to get the money out of Google and Facebook and all of these things and actually invest in local journalism.
Yeah.
But, what does a socialist sort of post, the destructive capitalist journalism look like? I guess, I can take that off call.
Thanks. That's a super interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually do think it's certainly not post-capitalism, but I think it's literally self-evidently crowd-supported peer-to-peer shows are a part of it for sure, because this is how you get content like this. I know that that's part of the answer. I don't know. I mean, beyond that, I mean, I think things like ProPublica are operating in that very traditional nonprofit foundation model and doing really good investigative reporting. But honestly, how Matt says, cancel your Washington Post sub, cancel your New York Times sub, do that. And of course, it would be a lie if we didn't say part of that sub would be nice if it came to shows like this. But you should start looking around at independent journalist collectives, at local newspapers that are worth their salt. I mean, I think that's the kind of direction that things need to start going in.
If you look at the amount of people employed in journalism versus PR for the past 30 years, PR has just dwarfed been just rising precipitously, while journalism has gone the exact opposite way, and that's partially why the media environment now is so hospitable to fascists. I don't know what I guess, we used to do things in this country like, we still do obviously, but like free postage for newspapers or something like that, basically subsidies to journalism.
Right.
I think we're at a phase now where you basically just have to make it easier to hire and do things. So like you take care of healthcare at a federal level. You decommodify more things, basically make living less expensive for people.
I think, yeah, that's right. I mean, if you decommodify more things, that translates to more people doing journalism. That translates to somebody leaving law school and doing public interest law instead of working for a corporation.
Yeah, I remember when I was like in school reading an article about a local journalist in LA who had moved from journalism to PR, basically saying like, I can't, make the ends I need to make to live my life doing this. And there's a whole bunch of articles with that now, with that same headline.
And that's basically a timeless thing too. George Orwell's one of his first and not very good books is called Keep the Aspidistra Flying, which is about this guy who wants to be a novelist, but instead he writes advertisements.
Right.
And it's a timeless thing, but it's who's paying for you, or is it? And that's going to determine what you write. And I mean, PR is awful. No disrespect to anybody in that, because I applied for those jobs too, but.
Right. Hey, Michael, did you see Warren talking about taking big donor money in the general election, then backtracking immediately? How can you take corporate money and deliver systemic change simultaneously, in solidarity to striking workers in Saskatchewan and the UAW? Well, first of all, definitely solidarity with striking workers. I have to be honest, I am not as invested in the money and politics conversation as other people are. However, I will say this is another one where if money in politics is your issue, and it is an important issue, to me, it's like, look, money in politics is very important, but money in politics is not going to solve the systemic problem of capital in this society. And I think some people really overshoot what can be achieved with it, but important things can and should be achieved. Bernie's money in politics plan is the plan. We're on several issues now where, Sanders is just saying like, hey, everything that people have been talking about in podcasts and in Nation articles and saying, wouldn't that be amazing if, for decades, he's just saying like, yes, okay, I've got you. That's my plan. So, and yes, I think there is absolutely an inherent tension in Warren's approach. It might be a very savvy approach tactically. And I think when the rubber meets the road, if she actually gets to the White House, which obviously is a whole other question and challenge, the idea that you are going to triangulate between, then let's be real, not systemic change, but I would say even significant reform in certain areas, with a non-movement based politics that is also built around appeasing a lot of people in the same structures that have set up all of these systems. I actually do think we need to start looking at how President Obama's first couple of years went. The whole terrain of politics has shifted significantly to the left, so we're playing on a different field. But actually, to be, I'm someone who always advocates being fair to President Obama. There's a lot of parallels there in terms of, well, actually the movement parallel is different, but we're going to make peace with a lot of institutions, but then we're also going to try to attack big picture problems. There's an inherent tension there. And, and I think even the mixed, there's mixed reports out of Wall Street. I have no doubt that there's some Wall Street people that are look, they're babies. They didn't support Obama's reelection because he said some things that they didn't like. Okay. Like, let alone any type of tougher reform, let alone floating any type of wealth tax. Right. So there are some people that will say like, look, unless you nominate Joe Biden, I'll support Trump, because they're babies and they're endlessly greedy. But there's also multiple stories coming out of Wall Street learning to get used to the idea of Warren. There was one in Politico. There's been one in some of the business press. And I think part of it is because they're always looking like her lobbying proposal to me was just silly. Like, we're going to put a tax on lobbyists. Well, okay, either they'll find a workaround. You know, someone will be a lawyer for a firm, not a lobby. You know, there's all these games people can play with those types of things. Or worst case, okay, we'll just factor it into our profits. Sure, we'll pay a new tax. Bummer, not good. Go back to lobbying. Whereas the types of reforms and systemic change that Sanders is putting on the table is like, it's the difference between a big convoluted scheme versus like, this practice is done. We're not doing that anymore. Done. And that is a fundamental threat, you know, across the board. I think even including to a lot of professional people's conceptions of themselves, which is why there's such a weird, bizarre hatred for him. So I'm actually, you know, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about Warren and campaign contributions, because I don't really spend a huge amount of time talking about anybody and their campaign contributions, and I don't particularly care, frankly. And I actually think on the continuum, I think the last thing I'll say is, like, I think specifically her military industrial complex record is very bad, and she's voted for all military budget increases, and she's been a point person for Raytheon, and she's also been a point person for some local healthcare industry interests in Massachusetts. But you will find her on that spectrum of like one-to-one campaign contributions, equal legislation and access. She's going to be well above the average in terms of good. So that's just not, you know, but if that is your area and that is your passion, here's another one where Bernie is giving you 100% what you want. So I don't get the whole equivocating about somebody who's giving you 70% or 60% of what you want. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I would just echo what you're saying. I think the money in politics thing is good. I think it's a very limited indicator of what's going on, and people treat it like a decoder ring too often.
I that's how I see it. You're calling from a 447 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 447. Are you there? I guess not. 447. I'm trying you one more time. Not there. Not good. You're calling from a 650 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. This is Garrett in Sacramento.
Hey, Garrett. What's going on?
So I was calling about Medicare for All. So my girlfriend, she works over at the Kaiser that was just resolved their strike issues. You guys talked about it about a week ago.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, in Bernie's plan, for example, what would, for the workers, a transition into Medicare for All look like?
What, you mean people who work at healthcare companies?
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that? What is in the plan? I know that Bernie, at least with regards to the Green New Deal, has incredible proposals on everything from retraining to job guarantee to early retirement if people want it. And so my assumption would be that there would be, I mean, look, first of all, I just want to say part of the answer is he's proposing a federal jobs guarantee, which is like kind of another stunningly amazing proposal, which would do a massive amount. I mean, between Green New Deal, single payer healthcare, and jobs guarantee and his labor plan, you would completely remake the American economy, which would benefit all workers. So one part of the answer would be in a radical, unparalleled way of any proposal or anything in modern politics. But I think one answer would be the federal job guarantee. But I don't know the specific answer on specific retraining in that regard. Do either of you guys know about that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what the job is within the healthcare industry, right?
Right.
So if you're a manager of, you know, people's Medicare and Medicaid accounts, their Part D, like they're going to have to build out a robust, you know, CMS system that will be run through the federal government. And I think that a lot of those workers at Kaiser, at Emblem Health, at these like companies that are already managing public programs, there will be opportunities for those people. Now, do I think like people who are selling drugs to doctors' offices are going to have like great jobs moving forward, trying to push the next Oxy onto users? Probably not.
If your girlfriend's an
I mean,
Oxy dealer, she's not going to do well.
Definitely doesn't go towards, I mean, like the upper like what you're saying. Okay, I'm selling like some drugs. I'm more concerned with like the nurses, the
nurses. Nurses will be nurses. Well, wait, nurses are totally fine. Nurses are 100% fine. If anything, I mean, the rate of growth, like the rate of growth, the rate of growth for things like nurses, home health care aides, doctors is, I mean, the only way that that's going to decrease, frankly, and I mean, I'm sorry, I know some people don't like this, but there is going to need to be some conversation of people like, we do want to practice a little bit more prevention in terms of people's health, which will also be benefited by single payer because people get early checkups. But things including environmental policies, diet, exercise, those things are also obviously going to be really important. But we're also an aging population. So there's going to be a growth in those jobs regardless of whether or not we have parasite industries or not. Thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, certainly those jobs.
I mean, it's going to be administrative. That's where the bloat is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think in that case, I mean, look, this is a classic example of it's a bullshit job. So, what do you do when you phase out bullshit jobs? You have a broad federal jobs guarantee. And then I think you also, my guess would be is a lot. Look, I know people who are in that industry. They would be, and I don't like to speak on behalf of other people, but I could tell you this as like a verbatim quote practically. I would be thrilled if somebody paid me to go to college and change what I was doing. Okay? And for the 2 people in America that miss hounding people for their, checkup payments, I guess it's just it's a cross we're going to have to bear. You're calling from a 301 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Connor from the DMV.
Connor from the DMV. What's up?
What's going on?
What's going on,
guys? Really appreciate everything you guys do. You've inspired me a lot.
Thanks, man.
In the last couple months, especially when I found out about your program.
Thanks.
Looking forward to Philadelphia next month since, like I said, I'm from DMV, not too far away. So
sweet.
Can make the trek.
Awesome.
I had a question about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of 2-pronged. So I found a lot of thought it was really smart when you guys were talking about not necessarily trying to go too hard with convincing new people, but convincing old people, I guess, who are like already kind of stuck in their beliefs. Not necessarily old people, but just like people who might have different opinions, then bringing in the new people, because I was kind of getting stuck there and it was extremely frustrating. So now I've started to go on the weekends to different malls and shopping centers and try to get people registered to vote on Saturdays and Sundays.
Cool.
But I do also think there is some value in that. And I was wondering like what kind of alternatives you may know about, or if you don't, that's cool too. For like for example, my grandparents, like they consume a lot of news, but they're also kind of, like whenever I like get into actual substance, they're always like very open to like what I'm talking about. Although their first instinct is like, Bernie. But then like when I start talking about like, well, they're like, oh, because they are really like New Deal type of Democrats.
Oh no, I think that you gotta talk to people and persuade, and this is the tricky thing. I mean, because there's no one, people call in and ask questions, and sometimes I feel like people say like, hey, I've got a neighbor who's like practically in the Klan. And we say like, yeah, don't worry about, like, don't waste your life on that person, right? That's.
But I know even when you guys are talking about like the Warren people too.
Well, I disagree. Look, I think I'll be really clear about this. And it depends on who you're talking to and what you're talking about. And look, again, I think it's kind of funny. Like, there's a certain bluntness that I will have on a public platform that I'm not going to have when I'm talking to, like, I don't know, like one of my mom's friends or something. Okay. But
right.
But you should, I think, of course, you should be persuading Warren people to vote for Sanders. This is really important. It matters. It has huge implications for people's lives, and there's a radically better choice. It's a no-brainer. And I mean, obviously, if somebody's considering voting for Biden or some other God forbid candidate, or Jesus Christ, Tulsi Gabbard, or I mean, frankly, but to me, I got to be clear, Jesus Christ, any of them. And I'll say this before everybody whine. Everybody will whine in both directions. I will support the Democrat in the general election as a prevention of Trump, period, full stop. And in the primary, it's Bernie, no messing around. So I would say that if, look, there's one answer, which is the only credible answer, and there's nothing to talk about. If somebody says the only thing that I'm voting on is I want the first woman president, and you say, okay, I hear you. Thanks for sharing. Whatever else you got to talk about, right? That's it. That's literally a 5-second conversation. And then if somebody, if they say the plan thing, I think it's very important to make an argument going back to actually the earlier caller. Well, what are we talking about here? There's a difference between advocacy and, just platonically putting forward plans. And now, incidentally, now that we both have a bunch of plans on the dock, obviously, and we all knew this was going to be the case, of course, Bernie's are radically more progressive than I would say. And, this is my bias, but I think it's appalling that people don't consider foreign policy. And really, as soon as you consider foreign policy, the conversation's over. It's done. And actually, even as I maintain that to compare Warren, to say that she's like Clinton or Biden, domestic policy is inaccurate on some very important areas. On foreign policy, she is quite similar. She's totally within that consensus. So, just push it forward. That's what I would do. And then if
okay,
yeah, that's what I would do. Appreciate the call, man.
Okay, all right. Well, take it easy, and like I said, I definitely appreciate everything you do. It's helped me out a lot. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Have a great day. Take care. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Ecuador. So there are ongoing demonstrations there that have been met with an extremely brutal response by the Lenin Moreno government. These protests are led by indigenous people, but they also have a representation in labor, in ecology, in women's rights, and all sorts of areas that you would expect of a broad-based organic left uprising. We have some footage that Camila from Telesur posted. I follow her account and other Telesur accounts for this sort of thing. Lenin Moreno was the successor of Rafael Correa, and he was elected on the center-left Democratic Socialist platform in 2017, and has immediately reversed course in an extreme way upon taking government. He's actually actively trying to jail his predecessor, Rafael Correa, who governed Ecuador at the heart of the pink tide. There's rumors that he's taken direct bribes from, the United States. We don't know really why, but his politics, after winning on a center-left successor ticket, have taken a sharp, extreme right turn. This is why he kicked Julian Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy, as an example. This is why he's reconfigured the geostrategic relationship with the United States into a much more subservient one. And in the last couple of days, he's unveiled a slew of IMF-backed austerity measures, including scrapping a fuel subsidy, which would, of course, as all of these IMF plans do, be enormously damaging to Ecuador's underclass. Now, Rafael Correa lifted a lot of people out of poverty and was incredibly brave in facing U.S. hegemony, and was another one of these dynamic leaders in the pink tide era. However, his record on indigenous rights was actually really quite bad in some very key ways, and he sided consistently with mining interests over them. There was some change at points in his administration, and there's complexity to this. But there was real problems there. And so it's significant that this is an indigenous-led movement. And Lenin Moreno, in typical right-wing paranoid fashion, is blaming Maduro and Correa for fomenting a revolution, even as the people that are actually leading it are consistently saying that they are not an instrument of Correa. And in fact, sort of there's pushback from his own political faction, sort of harnessing the movement. So we'll keep following what's happening in Ecuador. And this is a lot closer to us than Hong Kong and much more implicated by U.S. policy and U.S. companies like Chevron and U.S. mining companies who've caused an enormous amount of damage in Ecuador. Why does this get so little attention? And why do most profiles mention problems with Correa, some of which might be real, some of which are fake, don't necessarily emphasize his significant accomplishments, and almost uniformly ignore the serious allegations across the board about Lenin Moreno? Hopefully he'll be gone. You are calling from a 504 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. It's Jeff from Louisiana.
Hey, what's going on, Jeff? What's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to shout out to your conversations about China. I watched your stuff.
Thanks.
That you did this week, and then before that, I watched your China stuff that you did with Richard Wolff.
Cool.
It was really interesting, but I was kind of interested in what do you think? What would a Sanders administration what could they do to I know you have some different opinions, but just to kind of show some solidarity at least with the Hong Kong protesters and stuff. What can they do specifically, maybe in that kind of administration?
I don't think there's much that you could do specifically about Hong Kong. I mean, I think, he can discourse solidarity with things like the labor movement in Hong Kong, which he should do and everybody should do. They can put out and emphasize through diplomatic action things like the things that are happening to the Uyghurs, which is absolutely appalling. Don't let anybody kind of whitewash or spin that. But then on the other hand, there needs to be a lot of constructive areas to work with China on. That's also reality. You do not want some type of new Cold War with China. So the fact that Sanders' Green New Deal does talk about building significant partnerships with China on rapidly deploying green technology as an example is super positive and very important. So you need to have a constructive relationship with them. And even as we don't whitewash China, we can't also fall into the same old arrogant, hegemonic, xenophobic attitudes about it either. And I actually think people like Matt Duss have a very good handle on that. Thanks for the call, man.
And if the F-35 wasn't such a disaster, we'd have another option on the table.
Is it 7-7, Matt? Because I'm not seeing it. Okay. All right. Let's take one or two more calls and then we're out of here. You are calling from a 340 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Matt. This is Alex from Wisconsin by way of the Virgin Islands. I still got your room ready for you down there.
Okay. All right. In the Virgin Islands or Wisconsin?
Yes. I live in Wisconsin. I've been here for 10 years.
No, I was saying, is the room in the Virgin Islands or Wisconsin? Because Virgin Islands.
Oh, it's definitely in the Virgin Islands.
All right, done. I'm there. All right. What is on your mind?
Is just going to cook you a huge pan of rice and chicken. I just wanted to talk a bit about a part of the healthcare system that not too many talk about often, and it's called subrogation. And subrogation means that if you are hurt at work, if you're hurt in a car accident, if you fall in a grocery store, and any of those car insurances or workers' comp or employers decide or have to either pay for your injuries, for your medical care, for damages, for pain and suffering, there are laws that allow health insurances to get that money back from people. And so what that means is that if you're in a car accident and you injure your neck and you get a $3,000 settlement from the car insurance, but you had an x-ray the day of the accident and you had a CT scan and you had to get checked out to make sure that you weren't severely injured. If that money is $3,000 or even more, you are going to have to pay that back to your health fund. And this is another reason why we need Medicare for all. People, and these are people on Medicaid, people on Medicare. The state of Iowa had a particularly disgusting feature for their Medicare plans where if you did not respond to a letter asking if your care was something they could possibly get money back for, they would cancel your Medicare coverage, your Medicaid coverage. And, you know, these types of things are seriously hurting people. And there's no reason why, if you were injured and a third party is liable, your health insurance should be paid back. And as much as there are laws that allow them to do that, those laws are particularly disgusting.
That is absolutely disgusting, and I didn't know anything about that. Although now that I think about it, I think I might have known somebody who was dealing with something along those lines. Do you guys know about this? I mean, that's
it's insane. I mean, like,
disgusting.
Every health insurance has a recovery department and a subrogation department. And their job is strictly to recover money from workers' comp insurances, from car insurances, and oftentimes from people who get settlements from these parties because they have a legal right by the law to get paid back. Like, it's disgusting. There are very few states that have anti-subrogation laws. New York is one of the big ones. But for a lot of people, it's tough because sometimes they are oftentimes in a situation where there's a $50,000 settlement, but they have $100,000 in medical bills. They have 33% of that $50,000 settlement already promised to the attorney, and yet somehow they're supposed to be compensated for pain and suffering. That's impossible. And it oftentimes ends up in these people having to give more of their money to an attorney or quite possibly just to health insurance. If you do not sometimes pay back your health insurance, they are going to cancel your coverage.
Right.
There are some people who are on payment plans to their health insurance companies because they accepted a settlement without even knowing that they were going to have to pay back their company and their health insurance for the x-ray they got and for the emergency care they got.
Well, that's really disgusting, and yet another of that's like the argument 1 million of why we need Medicare for all. I really appreciate the call.
Yeah. No, you're welcome. I thank you guys for all the great work. My nickname for you, Michael, is Wolf Daddy. I like how you have like a little bit extra bite there. I think it's very much required in this atmosphere, in this this world that we're in right now.
I appreciate that. All right. Have a great one. Thank you. Let's take a final call. I'm sorry I'm picking at random, obviously, and yeah, there really are a lot of calls. It's crazy. Let's try to go local. You're calling from a 347 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hi. This is Ali from Astoria.
Hey, Ali. What's going on?
Well, I had two questions, but considering how much time we have, I'll stick with one and then I have a plug.
Okay, please.
All right. So considering what's happening in California with PG&E, where Northern California is going to have like 6 days of no electricity because PG&E didn't want to invest in tree cutting because it would hurt the bottom line. Right. I was thinking of that interview you guys had a couple of months ago where the interviewee was talking about leftists wanting to nationalize utilities.
Right.
And it seemed like Sam and the crew shared the sentiment that it wasn't a good idea to
Oh
nationalize
no,
utilities. I was wondering.
wrong interpretation.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we didn't share that interpretation.
I mean, look, can I just say this?
Sure.
You can't argue about everything. So if there is a guest particularly a guest, if there is a guest as an example, like I thought the interview on Merge Left was quite interesting, and then the conclusions he started to draw were like, what? Like I thought there was some right, like, so you know, it's dynamic, and you know what I say on TMBS is, and I don't assume that just because we can't, turn everything into an additional debate or diversion that we agree with everything. Sometimes you just need to keep it flowing. I totally did not agree with that view. And in fact, I have been calling for that type of thing for a while. And I'm assuming, Matt, you also.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that because, we don't agree with that part of that interview.
It was wrong and not the right view.
Okay, fair enough. And then my plug is there's going to be action against Salesforce and ICE in the New York area. People are going to gather at the New York Public Library at 4 p.m. tomorrow to march on Salesforce, which is the software underwriting ICE, to try to convince them to get out of, helping the oppressors that are jailing children right now. So if you have anything to do tomorrow and you're in the New York area, or if you have nothing to do tomorrow and you're in the New York area, please come. It'll be great. We're going to march and it'll be fun.
Awesome. What time is that at and where again? Just give them one more time.
4 p.m. We're going to gather at 4 p.m. in the New York Public Library. The Salesforce building is pretty close to it. So we're going to do a quick circuit around there. There's going to be some speakers. There's organizations like Close the Camps Alliance and Code Pink, and they're going to have some great activists speak for a bit. And then we're just going to go to the doors and try to bother some technocrats at work.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Go there. Thank you, Ali.
Yeah,
great work.
Thank you.
Salesforce is a big company. I think mainly in the corporate world, people are familiar with it. But that's like a platform for, I don't know exactly how to describe it.
Some type of cloud service.
Yeah, cloud-based.
Yeah, they are a bit. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it either, but they are a very big company. They also have a lot of branding. Mark Benioff on things like mindfulness and compassionate leadership. So, additional questions to draw.
It's CRM, customer relations management.
There it is.
My roommate used that acronym the other day. I said, "What does that mean?" Because now I'm starting to as more and more media companies go out of business, I'm starting to, try and learn some things.
What's CRM?
Oh, that's the actual I guess. Name.
That's also their stock exchange.
Yeah, their CRM on markets.
Really? So that's actually a real phrase that isn't some new.
I guess it's their phrase. I just thought content rights.
I think they took it and,
Yeah.
Virginia Progressive. Michael, do you agree with Sam on the strategy to draw out the impeachment process? I feel like the same mistakes will be made with the 2-year odyssey that was the Mueller report. The Ukraine calls are enough, so why not make this a layup and win the court of public opinion instead of drawing it out and letting the sycophants on the right attack the narrative? I'm wary of the Washington Generals effing things up. Besides, the 2020 election needs to be about the climate crisis, healthcare, student debt, and non-impeachment. Well, no, I like the idea of drawing it out if you mean drawing, which is what they
Otherwise, you just get it to the Senate so then they can not do anything about it, and that's a victory for Trump.
That's true. I mean, I like the idea, though, of drawing it out in a way which they've already said they're not going to do, which is starting to put everything on the table. Daily hearings on the terrorism at the border, on his taxes, on emoluments, on the Saudis. I mean, just pound them.
Right.
Pound them. Take away people's salaries. Play vicious. Play ruthless. I generally agree with you about what the election's about, and I think that, the impeachment thing is a wash. I think it's going to motivate people who hate him and motivate people who like him. And the Ukraine thing, I don't know, man. I think if you build it, they will come to some extent. The numbers have been switching. I don't know how much salience it has for a lot of people, but it's, they're doing it, so I hope it works.
I mean, I have criticisms of the focus on Russia, but I think people have massively overlearned the idea that it was some sort of catastrophic odyssey. I just don't buy that kind of language or adjectives for it. I don't think it was that big of a deal either way, frankly.
I think it was a very big. I think that I disagree with the idea that it didn't feed the national security state, for lack of a better term. And I think that is actually a really big problem. And you don't need to go all the way up to saying it's going to lead to World War III or a war with Russia to recognize that that is a really big problem. And then on a political level, yeah, it didn't make any. It made like no. It was mainly a waste of time and fairly embarrassing. And it I mean, if you look at cost benefit, the millions of hours that were wasted on that could have been put into like pushing something like Medicare for all, instead of signing up for Tom Steyer's stupid list or something.
But none of those people that put time into caring about that were going to be
Yes.
pushing for
I think
Medicare
that's
for
true.
all. That's why I mean, even this current, I basically subscribe to Sam's view on the impeachment thing, but I also think it's like, as far as like, it's a liberal law thing. Like, there's not a whole lot of room on the left to be working that anyway. Like, it's not really our thing. Like, I hope it goes well.
Of course.
But
and the stuff that Brad Miller pointed out yesterday, that's the important liberal law stuff. Like, that stuff actually matters.
Right.
That stuff actually has implications for, but see, what I find myself in a funny position of being like, the same reason that I would read and share the Brad Miller article is the same reason I'd read and share the Matt Taibbi article. Because I'm concerned about those systems writ large.
Right.
And we all know that the resistance and liberal people don't actually care about it because they're horrible on whistleblowers and they trust the CIA and they're, and all of this. I mean, not all of them, but a chunk of them. And then we know that, there's some people with amazing and correct critiques of the intelligence apparatus who are, at least seem fairly allergic to going up aggressively against the Trump administration, even as it literally says, like, no, we're just not going to cooperate. So I actually, in some ways, see it all as part of the same continuum of what I have a problem with. But hey, MR crew, Kentucky Fried Camera. Hey, MR crew, I wanted to message into the beta report and let you know that my debate with Jesse Lee Peterson drops tomorrow. It's a lot. It's amazing. Amazing. That's hilarious.
Do you have an open invitation to like the Left is Best crew?
I think so. All right. The final IM of the day. Goes to Thames Darwin. Michael, every Turkish government since 1923 has been terrible on the issue of ethnic minorities, whether Kurds, Greeks, Jews, or Armenians, or are I'm going to I even know what group you're talking about. God damn it. CIRCASSIANS. Circassians? Circassians? Greeks, Jews, or Armenians. What makes the AKP and Erdogan uniquely toxic is the synthesis of this religious nationalism, of this ethnic nationalism with right-wing religious fundamentalism, which makes it like Ataturk on steroids. I think that's very astute. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between